There is a thought that Carl Jung kept returning to throughout his life, not in his public lectures, not in the books he published for the world to read, but in his private journals, in his letters, in the work he called his most dangerous and most honest. The thought was this: what if the most complete psychological transformation ever recorded in human history did not happen in a consulting room in Zurich? What if it happened in first-century Palestine, in a desert, in a garden, on a hill outside Jerusalem? What if the man the world spent 2,000 years arguing about theologically was, in Jung's eyes, something far more specific and far more personal than a religious figure? What if Jesus of Nazareth was the first human being in documented history to go all the way through? Not all the way through doctrine, not all the way through faith in the way institutions define it, but all the way through the process Jung spent his entire career mapping: the descent into the self, the integration of everything a human being buries, rejects, and fears about themselves, the death of the false self and the emergence of something real on the other side. Jung called this process individuation, and he believed, quietly, carefully, with the precision of a man who knew how dangerous the claim was, that Jesus completed it, fully, publicly, in front of witnesses, and left a record that the world has been misreading ever since. This is what that record actually says when you know how to read it. Before we go any further, you need to understand what individuation actually means, because the word gets used constantly and almost always incorrectly. In Jung's framework, the human psyche is not a single unified thing. It is more like a house with rooms that nobody talks about. The room you live in, the one you show guests, the one with the good lighting, Jung called the ego, the conscious self, the version of you that has a name and a career and an opinion about things and believes, genuinely believes, that it knows who it is. But underneath the ego, behind the locked doors, in the rooms you stopped going into, is the unconscious, ancient, vast, filled with everything the ego decided was too much, too dark, too shameful, too raw, too hungry to be allowed into the light. Jung called the rejected contents of the unconscious the shadow. And here is the thing about the shadow that most people never understand. The shadow is not simply your dark side. It is not just your anger, or your envy, or your capacity for cruelty, though those are part of it. The shadow is every part of yourself that was told by your family, by your culture, by your religion, by the 1,000 invisible rules of the world you grew up in, that it was not acceptable, your grief that was too inconvenient, your ambition that was too threatening, your hunger for something real in a world of surfaces, your rage at a life that never quite fit. Most people spend their entire lives running from the shadow. They project it outward, seeing in other people the qualities they cannot bear in themselves. They drown it in routine. They build identities so airtight that nothing uncomfortable can get in. Individuation is the refusal to keep running. It is the decision, almost always forced by some form of suffering, that the ego could not manage its way out of, to turn around, to descend, to go into the dark rooms and meet whatever is there, to integrate everything that was buried back into consciousness. Jung was clear about what this process costs. He watched patients break under it. He nearly broke under it himself. During the years he called his confrontation with the unconscious, from 1913 to 1917, he came close to complete psychological disintegration. What he recorded in those years in the book he called the Red Book is not philosophy. It is the journal of a man who descended into his own abyss and came back changed. And when he came back, when he finally understood what he had survived, he looked at the life of Jesus and felt something he described as a recognition, not a theological conclusion, a psychological one. He recognized the pattern, the same descent, the same confrontation, the same death and the same emergence, lived publicly, historically, in front of witnesses. The map had been there for 2,000 years. Most people just did not know how to read it. Jung's reading of Jesus does not begin at the manger. It begins at the Jordan River. The baptism, as recorded in the Gospel of Mark, the oldest of the four Gospels and the one closest to the original accounts, is described in language that is startlingly violent if you slow down long enough to notice it. The heavens are not gently parted, they are torn apart. The Greek word used is schizo, to rip, to split open. And then the voice, "You are my Son, the Beloved. With you I am well pleased." Most people read this as divine affirmation, God speaking to his child. Jung read it as something more specific. He saw it as the moment Jesus consciously received what the Jungian tradition calls the numinous, an eruption from the deepest layer of the unconscious, an encounter with something so immeasurably larger than the ego that it can only be described in the language of the sacred. And notice what happens in the very next sentence. Immediately, the Spirit drives him into the desert. Not leads, not invites, drives. That is the language of compulsion, of being seized by something the ego did not choose and cannot control. Anyone who has genuinely begun the individuation process knows this feeling. The sense that the psyche itself is dragging you somewhere you would never voluntarily go. 40 days in the desert, alone. And then the adversary appears. Jung had a specific and deeply uncomfortable understanding of this figure. In his book, Answer to Job, he argued that what the biblical tradition calls Satan, the adversary, the diabolos in Greek meaning the one who throws things apart, functions psychologically as the shadow. Not merely a personal shadow, but the repressed and rejected dark aspect of the divine itself, projected onto a figure the tradition could exile outside the Godhead. What the adversary offers Jesus in the desert is worth looking at carefully. First, bread, the body's desperate hunger, the primal need for survival. Second, power over all the kingdoms of the world, the ego's deepest fantasy, total control, total recognition. And third, the demand to test God, to throw himself from the temple and force the divine to prove itself, which is the shadow's most seductive offer of all. Maybe the meaning you found is an illusion. Maybe none of this is real. Throw yourself off and see. Every one of these offers is a version of the same question. Who are you really? Beneath the hunger, beneath the uncertainty, beneath everything you have surrendered to be here, what do you actually want? And Jesus refuses each one. But here is the part Jung emphasized above all else. He does not refuse by pretending the temptations do not exist. He does not suppress them. He does not look away. He enters into dialogue with each one. He meets the shadow face to face and consciously chooses differently. That distinction is everything in Jungian psychology. Suppression does not eliminate the shadow. It drives it underground where it grows stronger and stranger and eventually erupts in ways the ego cannot predict or control. Conscious confrontation is what transforms it. You do not defeat the shadow by refusing to see it. You integrate it by looking directly at it and choosing who you are in its presence. That is what the 40 days in the desert actually are, the first great shadow confrontation. The ego meeting everything it buried and emerging from the encounter not destroyed, but clarified. What happens when a human being has survived the shadow confrontation and begins to live from the integrated self rather than from the defended ego? Jung had a precise answer. They become radically unconditioned. The ego always operates from conditioning. It needs approval. It requires validation. It calculates every choice based on what the world will think. It manages its image endlessly because its sense of existence depends on how it is reflected back. The integrated self has none of those needs. And when you read the ministry of Jesus through this lens, something remarkable becomes visible. He touches lepers. This makes him ritually unclean by every standard his culture holds sacred. He speaks publicly with women, which is deeply transgressive in that world. He eats with tax collectors and sinners, the people his entire community has designated as untouchable, as shadow figures, as the ones whose darkness must be kept at a safe distance. Every person his society has projected its shadow onto, Jesus moves toward. He approaches, he sits with them, he integrates them into his story. Jung saw this as individuation made visible in relationship. The man who has integrated his own shadow can no longer project it onto others. Where the unindividuated person sees a threat or an enemy or a moral failure, the individuated person sees a human being, because they have already met that same darkness in themselves, and they are no longer afraid of it. And then the teachings: love your enemies, the kingdom of heaven is within you. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Jung spent decades with these words. His conclusion was that they are not moral instructions in the conventional sense. They are not commands issued to people who are not yet good enough. They are psychological descriptions of what life actually looks like after individuation. Loving your enemies is not something the ego can do. The ego requires opposition. It defines itself by contrast, by what it is not, by who it fights. But the self, which has integrated its own shadow, no longer needs enemies. It has nothing left to project. The kingdom of heaven is within you. The original Greek, entos haimon, translates more accurately as within you or in the midst of you, not a destination, not a reward distributed after death, a state of consciousness, available now, to anyone who has done the descent. Jung believed Jesus was describing, in the language available to a first-century rabbi in occupied Palestine, the same psychological reality Jung himself was mapping in clinical terms 2,000 years later. The self, the integrated whole, the living center that makes a human being fully human. Here is where Jung's reading becomes almost unbearable. The Garden of Gethsemane. The night before everything ends. Jesus withdraws from his disciples, even from the three closest to him, Peter, James, and John, and goes alone into the garden. And according to Luke's Gospel, his sweat became like drops of blood falling to the ground. Hematohydrosis, a documented medical phenomenon. Under extreme psychological anguish, blood can seep through the sweat glands, the body itself breaking under the weight of what the mind is carrying. And the prayer: Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. He wants out. He does not want to die. At the height of his power, after everything he has taught and demonstrated and given, Jesus is not serene. He is not calm. He is in agony. Jung returned to this moment again and again throughout his life, because here is what it reveals, and here is what the churches, both East and West, have consistently failed to grasp. The fully individuated person is not someone who has transcended their humanity. They are someone who has gone all the way into it. The ego says, protect yourself, avoid the suffering. There must be another way. And for one naked, terrifying, fully human moment, Jesus agrees with the ego. Take this cup from me. But then, the second half of the sentence. The sentence Jung believed contains the entire architecture of psychological transformation. Yet not my will, but yours be done. In Jungian terms, not the ego's will, but the self's. Not the preference of the conscious mind, but the deeper, unified center that has already integrated what the ego cannot bear to face. Jung was unambiguous. This is the pivotal moment, not the resurrection, Gethsemane. The moment when a human being, in full awareness of what it will cost, chooses the path of wholeness over the path of survival. The crucifixion, read psychologically, is the death of the ego, not the death of a person in the ultimate sense, the death of a psychological structure, the structure that says I am separate, I am defended, I am in control, I am the version of myself that needs protecting. And Jung pointed, over and over, to the most theologically uncomfortable moment in the entire narrative, the cry from the cross, in Aramaic, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? The Church has always struggled with this. Various theological traditions have tried to explain it away, to contextualize it, to soften it, because a God who feels abandoned by God is deeply inconvenient if your religion is built on certainty and protection. Jung saw something entirely different. He saw the moment of absolute psychological nakedness, the moment when every support structure collapses simultaneously. The followers have fled. The crowd is hostile, the miracles are silent, and the interior sense of divine presence, the very thing that sustained him through the desert and the ministry in Gethsemane, goes quiet. In Jung's framework, there is always this moment in the individuation process, the moment when the ego has surrendered and the self has not yet emerged, the void between death and rebirth, the darkness where nothing is certain and nothing can be grasped. Jesus does not narrate his way around this darkness. He does not manage it with theology. He screams into it. And that scream, that raw, unmediated expression of abandonment, is itself the act of someone in complete contact with their actual experience, not performing, not bypassing, not above it, fully human, fully present, in the worst possible moment. Jung believed this is precisely what makes it transformative, not the miracle, the honesty, the willingness to go all the way into the darkness without pulling back at the last moment. Jung approached the resurrection with the careful precision of someone who knew the difference between two kinds of truth. Historical truth asks whether the physical body of Jesus literally rose from the dead. That is a question for historians and theologians, and it is not the question Jung was most interested in. Psychological truth asks what the resurrection points to in the architecture of transformation, what it means, what it maps onto. And here Jung was direct. When the ego truly dies, truly surrenders its grip rather than performing its surrender, something emerges that could not have existed before. The resurrected Christ in the Gospels is not simply the pre-crucifixion Jesus returned. He appears in locked rooms. He is not always immediately recognized. He eats fish on a beach at dawn, but also passes through walls. He is embodied, but not bounded in the way ordinary flesh is bounded. Jung saw this as the phenomenology of the self. The thing that emerges after individuation is neither the old ego restored nor its opposite. It is something genuinely new, rooted in the human but no longer confined by the ego's constrictions, no longer needing to defend a position or protect an image, meeting each person exactly where they are without armor, and then the ascension, the withdrawal of the physical presence. Jung saw this as the final stage, the integration of the individuated pattern into the collective psyche. The Christ figure, he argued, became an archetype, a living pattern deposited into the human unconscious that anyone, anywhere, in any era can encounter in dreams, in visions, in the depths of psychological crisis. The man moves on, the map remains, and that map, Jung believed, has been guiding human beings toward wholeness ever since, not through doctrine, not through creed, not through the institutions that built their power on the story, but through the deep grammar of the psyche itself, which recognizes the pattern because the pattern is its own. Carl Jung was not trying to reduce Jesus to a psychological case study. He was trying to say something stranger and more serious than that. He was saying that psychology, when it goes deep enough, and authentic spirituality, when it goes deep enough, keep arriving at the same territory: the descent, the shadow confrontation, the death of the constructed self, the emergence of something real. He believed Jesus was the first human being to complete this journey fully, consciously, publicly, and to leave a record precise enough that 2,000 years later, a Swiss psychiatrist sitting in Zurich could look at it and recognize every stage of the map. The desert is real. The garden is real. The cry of abandonment is real. The emergence is real. They are real not because they happened to one man in first-century Palestine. They are real because they happen to every human being who refuses to live an unlived life, who refuses to manage and perform and survive and call that enough. Jung spent his career insisting on one thing above all others. The most dangerous path a human being can take is not the path of suffering. It is the path of avoidance, the endless choosing of comfort over transformation, the extended Gethsemane of a life that never takes the next step. Jesus said, "Not my will," and went forward. That sentence, Jung believed, is the most psychologically precise description of what individuation actually requires that any human being has ever written down. So here is the question Jung would want you to sit with right now. Where are you in this map? Are you still in the desert, meeting the shadow's offers one by one, negotiating, trying to find a version of the confrontation that costs less? Are you in Gethsemane, knowing exactly what the next step requires, sweating through the night, still hoping someone will find another way? Or are you already on the other side of a crucifixion you did not choose, standing in the rubble of the person you used to be, not yet understanding that what comes next is not more death, but the thing that was never possible before the dying? Jung spent his entire life insisting that the map has been in front of us for 2,000 years, that the record is precise enough to follow, that the pattern is real enough to trust, and that most of us, protected by our routines and our institutions and our carefully maintained identities, never take the first step into the desert. Tell me in the comments where you are right now. The desert, the garden, the other side, or somewhere in between that does not have a name yet. I want to know. Because this conversation does not end here.